If you approve that transfer tonight, federal agents will be inside this building by morning. The words sliced through the boardroom so sharply that even the low hum of the ceiling lights seemed to stop. Every executive at the 30-foot glass table turned at once. Some blinked in confusion. Others frowned, visibly irritated that the interruption had come from the back corner of the room instead of the head of the table. Naomi Carter stood beside a chrome cleaning cart near the wall of windows overlooking downtown Chicago, one hand still wrapped around the handle of a spray bottle, the other gripping a folded microfiber cloth. Her dark blue janitor uniform looked painfully out of place against the polished marble floors, $1,000 suits, and glowing digital projections floating across the massive presentation screens. Rain tapped softly against the glass behind her, streaking the skyline in silver lines. Richard Whitmore slowly lowered the pen in his hand. The white-haired son sat at the center of the table beneath the cold reflection of recessed lights, his tailored charcoal suit crisp enough to look untouched by the 12-hour workday that had exhausted everyone else in the room. His pale blue eyes locked onto Naomi with open disbelief, then irritation. "Excuse me," he asked quietly, though the silence around him made the words feel heavier than shouting. Naomi swallowed once. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs so hard she thought the room might hear it. But she stood her ground. "That transfer code," she said carefully. "The offshore account attached to it was flagged in a federal investigation 3 years ago. If this merger goes through tonight, your company could be tied to financial fraud by morning." A nervous chuckle escaped from somewhere near the legal team. One executive leaned back in his chair with a smirk while another muttered under his breath, "She's a maid." Naomi's fingers tightened around the cloth. She could feel heat crawling up her neck, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm not trying to disrespect anyone, sir. I just recognize the account numbers." Richard stared at her for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then he leaned back slowly in his leather chair and exhaled through his nose like a man already tired of wasting time. "You recognize them," he repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. And where exactly would a cleaning lady learn federal banking codes?" A few people around the table laughed softly. Naomi felt every pair of eyes in the room pressing against her skin. The city lights outside flickered across the polished floor beneath her shoes. "I studied forensic accounting before I left school," she answered. "I saw the same shell structure in a case study involving money laundering." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced toward the massive digital contract still glowing on the wall screen behind him. Then his expression hardened again, colder now. "You interrupted $1 billion negotiation because you read something online?" Naomi opened her mouth, but he cut her off immediately. "No, I've heard enough." He stood, straightening the front of his jacket with controlled precision. The movement alone was enough to make the entire room sit straighter. "Security," Richard said without raising his voice. "Escort her out and terminate her employment effective immediately." The room went still again. Naomi blinked once as the words settled over her like ice water. Somewhere behind her, elevator doors opened with a soft metallic chime. The rain outside grew heavier, washing the skyline into blurred streaks of white and gray, while Richard Whitmore picked his pen back up and prepared to sign the deal that was about to destroy everything. The service elevator doors closed with a dull metallic thud behind Naomi Carter, sealing off the sound of laughter and polished voices from the executive floor above her. For a moment, she just stood there alone beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, her reflection trembling faintly in the scratched steel walls of the elevator. Her breathing stayed controlled, but her fingers shook around the cardboard box resting against her hip. Inside it sat a half-empty thermos, a folded gray sweater, and the small spiral notebook she had carried with her for almost 4 years. Rainwater streaked down the outside windows as the elevator descended. 41 floors toward the lobby. The digital numbers glowed one by one in cold red light. 40, 39, 38. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. She could still hear Richard Whitmore's voice in her head. "You are a maid." The words had not hurt because they were false. They hurt because they were familiar. The elevator opened into the nearly empty lobby of Westbridge Dynamics. Midnight blue marble reflected the glow of chandeliers overhead, while security guards avoided looking directly at her. One of them, a young Hispanic man named Luis, shifted awkwardly near the front desk. "Naomi," he said quietly. "I am sorry." She managed a small nod. It is okay. But it was not okay. Not really. Outside, downtown Chicago looked blurred beneath heavy rain and streaks of passing headlights. Naomi stepped through the revolving doors and cold wind wrapped instantly around her face and neck. The wet pavement shimmered beneath streetlights like liquid silver. Across the avenue, yellow taxis crawled through traffic while steam rose from a subway grate near the curb. Naomi adjusted her coat tighter around herself and started walking toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. Her sneakers splashed softly through shallow puddles. Behind her, the Westbridge Tower stretched into the storm clouds like a glass needle disappearing into darkness. 3 years earlier, she had imagined a very different future. Back then, she sat in crowded lecture halls at Northwestern University with color-coded notebooks spread across library tables and forensic accounting textbooks stacked beside cold coffee cups. Numbers had always made sense to her. Patterns, transfers, irregularities hidden beneath polished reports. Her professors used to joke that Naomi could spot fraud faster than software. Then her father died from a sudden stroke during her junior year, leaving behind hospital debt, overdue rent notices, and a mother whose health collapsed only months later. Naomi withdrew from school quietly. No graduation, no internship, no second chance. Just 2 jobs, overnight shifts, and endless bills arriving in thin white envelopes. A gust of freezing wind pushed rain sideways beneath the bus. Shelter, as Naomi finally sat down on the metal bench. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the glass roof overhead. She placed the cardboard box beside her feet and rubbed warmth back into her hands. Across the street, giant digital billboards flashed advertisements over slick pavement, while somewhere in the distance a siren echoed through downtown traffic. Then her phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Naomi frowned and reached into her coat pocket. The screen lit her face pale blue beneath the rain-dark shelter. Unknown number. Another notification appeared before she could open it. Then another. Financial news alert. Federal investigators linked to offshore transfer activity involving major Chicago corporation. Naomi's stomach tightened instantly. More alerts followed. Anonymous leak suggests emergency inquiry tied to merger finalized tonight. She slowly looked back toward the glowing Westbridge Tower rising above the city skyline. High near the top floors, lights were suddenly switching on one office after another like sparks racing through darkness. And then, far down the avenue, she heard it. The low growl of engines moving fast through wet streets. The first black SUV slid to a stop in front of Westbridge Dynamics, so fast that water sprayed across the sidewalk in silver waves. Naomi watched from beneath the bus shelter, motionless now, her fingers tightening slowly around her phone. Another SUV appeared behind it. Then another. Their headlights cut through the rain like pale knives against the dark glass tower. Men in dark jackets stepped out quickly, moving toward the entrance with clipped urgency, while security guards scrambled to open the doors. Even from 3 blocks away, Naomi could feel the energy shifting inside the building. Panic had a rhythm to it. Fast footsteps. Sudden lights. Phones ringing too quickly. She had seen it before in old case studies and courtroom footage during college lectures. But this time it was real. Her phone buzzed again. Luis. She hesitated before answering. Hello. His voice came fast and low. Naomi, where are you? She glanced toward the buses crawling through rain along Michigan Avenue. At the stop near Wabash. Silence. Then she heard muffled shouting somewhere behind him. Federal agents are upstairs, Luis whispered. Everybody is freaking out. They stopped the signing right after you left. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Cold rain drummed harder against the glass roof overhead. I told him, she said softly. Luis exhaled shakily. Yeah, you did. Another voice shouted something in the background. A moment later the call ended abruptly. Naomi lowered the phone slowly into her lap. Across the avenue, people gathered beneath awnings trying to see what was happening near the tower entrance. Red and blue reflections flashed faintly across wet pavement as city traffic slowed. Somewhere high above the street, office lights flickered floor by floor through the storm-dark windows. Then the memory came rushing back. 3 nights earlier, Naomi had been alone on the executive floor just after midnight, pushing her cleaning cart through rows of silent glass offices while snow drifted softly outside the windows. Most nights the upper levels felt more like museums than workplaces. Everything polished. Expensive. Untouched. She remembered stopping outside conference room B because one of the projector screens had been left glowing blue in the dark. Numbers still covered the display. Transfer logs. Offshore routing codes. Internal authorizations. Naomi should have kept walking. Instead, something caught her eye. A Cayman Islands Shell account ending in 4472. Her chest tightened instantly. She had seen that number pattern before while studying a federal money laundering investigation during her sophomore year. Same layered routing structure. Same staggered transfers beneath reporting thresholds. Same hidden ownership trail disguised behind international consulting firms. Naomi had stepped closer to the screen without even realizing it. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the transaction chains one line at a time. Tens of millions moving through ghost corporations. No operational records. No tax exposure reports. No disclosed liabilities. It was wrong. Not suspicious. Wrong. The kind of wrong that destroyed companies overnight. She remembered writing several account numbers into her notebook with trembling hands while the cleaning cart wheels clicked softly behind her. At the time she told herself maybe there was another explanation. Maybe she misunderstood something. But tonight confirmed her worst fear. The bus shelter vibrated slightly as a city bus rolled past without stopping, tires hissing across flooded pavement. Naomi barely noticed. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tower ahead. Then suddenly, every television mounted inside the sports bar across the street switched at once to the same red breaking news banner. People near the windows turned toward the screens. Naomi slowly stood. Through the rain-blurred glass, she could just make out the headline crawling beneath the news anchor's face. Federal investigation launched into Westbridge Dynamics financial merger. Naomi's stomach dropped. A cold gust of wind swept rain beneath the shelter and rattled the advertisement panel beside her. Then her phone buzzed one more time. This time the caller ID made her breath catch instantly. Richard Whitmore. Naomi stared at the glowing name on her phone while rain hammered the roof of the bus shelter hard enough to drown out the city around her. Richard Whitmore. For a second she thought about letting it ring. After all, less than an hour earlier he had looked her directly in the eyes and dismissed her like she was invisible. But the phone kept vibrating in her hand, sharp and relentless beneath the storm. Finally, she answered. Hello. Silence met her first. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind filled with people whispering in the background and papers moving too fast across conference tables. When Richard finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Tighter. Where are you? Naomi looked through the rain toward the glowing tower. Federal vehicles still lined the curb outside Westbridge Dynamics, while reporters gathered beneath umbrellas near the entrance. Why? She asked quietly. Another pause. She heard someone speaking urgently near him before a door slammed shut. Miss Carter, Richard said carefully, like the words themselves tasted unfamiliar. I need you to come back to the building. Naomi almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of how quickly power changed direction when fear entered the room. She lowered herself slowly back onto the wet metal bench. You already fired me. That situation has changed. Has it? Wind pushed cold rain across the sidewalk while neon reflections rippled through puddles beside the curb. Across the street, reporters now crowded beneath the tower awning, cameras pointed toward the revolving doors. Naomi could see movement inside the lobby through the glass. Executives pacing, security rushing, phones glowing in trembling hands. Richard exhaled sharply into the receiver. Federal investigators found irregularities tied to the merger accounts, he admitted. The transfer codes are linked to shell corporations under investigation. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Hearing the confirmation did not feel satisfying the way she imagined it might. It just felt heavy. I tried to tell you that. His silence answered louder than words. Somewhere in the background she heard another man say, Sir, they are asking for all executive authorizations from the last 72 hours. Papers shuffled again. Then Richard spoke lower this time. You said you recognized the routing structures from forensic accounting studies. Yes. How much did you see? Naomi looked down at the notebook inside the cardboard box beside her feet. Raindrops tapped softly against the cover where it peeked through the open flap. Enough to know somebody inside your company buried illegal transfers beneath the merger, she answered. And enough to know it was not random. Richard did not respond immediately. Naomi imagined him standing in that polished boardroom, now stripped of certainty for the first time in years. The image almost did not feel real. Then his voice returned, quieter now. The investigators think the leak started internally. Naomi frowned slightly. Leak? Someone sent financial records anonymously to federal regulators 40 minutes before the signing. Her chest tightened. It was not me. I know. The answer came too fast. Too certain. Naomi blinked at the rain streaking down the glass beside her. Earlier that evening, Richard Whitmore had doubted every word she said. Now suddenly he believed her without hesitation. That frightened her more than his anger had. Sirens echoed somewhere farther downtown. Traffic crawled slowly through flooded intersections while cold wind rattled the loose advertisement panel beside the shelter. Richard lowered his voice further. Miss Carter, there is something else. Naomi said nothing. The account approvals were signed using my executive clearance, he admitted. But I never authorized the transfers. Naomi's stomach dropped slowly. She sat forward on the bench, pulse quickening again. Then somebody close to you did. Another long silence followed. When Richard finally answered, his voice sounded colder than the rain pouring over Chicago. That is exactly what I am afraid of. Naomi stood slowly beneath the bus shelter as thunder rolled somewhere above the Chicago skyline. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the glass roof beside her in steady silver streams, while Richard Whitmore remained silent on the other end of the call. The city around her felt colder now, sharper, like something invisible had cracked open. Who has access to your executive clearance? She asked finally. She heard him inhale once. Controlled. Careful. 3 people besides me, he answered. My chief financial officer, my chief operating officer, and my executive legal advisor. Naomi looked back toward the tower, glowing through sheets of rain. Then one of them set you up. Another silence. Somewhere behind Richard, voices overlapped in rising panic. Men arguing. Phones ringing nonstop. Then suddenly another voice cut through the line. Richard, federal investigators are asking specifically about Daniel Mercer. Naomi frowned instantly. The name meant nothing to her, but the reaction on the other end told her everything. Richard lowered the phone slightly, but not enough to block the sound completely. That is impossible, he snapped quietly. Daniel has been with this company 18 years. Sir, his office computer is gone. Naomi's pulse quickened. Rain lashed harder against the bus shelter windows as headlights streaked across flooded intersections nearby. Richard returned to the line. Voice tighter now. Miss Carter, did you happen to see any names connected to those transfers? Naomi closed her eyes, forcing herself back into memory. The glowing projector screen, the rows of offshore accounts, the authorization trail. Then suddenly she saw it again. One line buried beneath layered transfers. D. Mercer Holdings authorization override. Her eyes opened instantly. Daniel Mercer, she said quietly. Silence. Heavy this time. Dead heavy. She heard Richard stop, moving completely on the other end of the call. You are sure? Naomi looked down at the rainwater dripping from her sleeve. I wrote it in my notebook. For the first time since the call began, Richard sounded genuinely shaken. Not angry. Not defensive. Afraid. Daniel is my chief operating officer, he said slowly. He helped build this company from the beginning. Naomi swallowed. That does not mean he is innocent. A police siren wailed somewhere close now, echoing between skyscrapers while television helicopters thudded faintly overhead through the storm clouds. Across the avenue, reporters crowded closer to the tower entrance as more federal vehicles arrived. Naomi could feel the city turning Westbridge dynamics into tonight's headline in real time. Listen to me carefully, Richard said. Do not tell anyone what is in that notebook. Naomi frowned. Why? Because if Mercer realizes you saw those transfer chains, you become a threat. The words settled cold in her chest. She glanced instinctively toward the dark street beyond the shelter. A black sedan sat parked half a block away with headlights off, nearly invisible beneath the rain. Naomi had not noticed it before. Her heartbeat slowed. Richard, she said quietly. There is a car watching this bus stop. Silence exploded instantly on the other end. What? Black sedan. Driver inside. Been there at least 5 minutes. She heard movement suddenly. Fast footsteps. Richard speaking sharply to someone nearby. Do not leave that shelter, he ordered. I am sending security. Naomi almost answered, but stopped. Across the street, the sedan's headlights flickered on. Slow. Deliberate. The engine started with a low growl beneath the rain. Naomi's stomach tightened. The car began pulling away from the curb one careful inch at a time. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to let her know someone inside had been watching her this entire time. Then her phone buzzed with a second incoming call. Unknown number. Richard was still speaking urgently in her ear, but Naomi barely heard him now because the sedan had stopped directly across from the shelter. And through the rain-streaked windshield, she could finally make out the driver's face. Daniel Mercer. Naomi froze beneath the flickering bus shelter light as rain poured across the empty street between her and the black sedan. Daniel Mercer sat behind the wheel without moving, one hand resting calmly near the steering wheel while windshield wipers swept back and forth in slow rhythm. Even through the storm-dark glass, his face looked composed. Too composed. The kind of calm that made danger feel colder. Richard Whitmore's voice crackled sharply through her phone. Naomi? Naomi, answer me. She swallowed carefully without taking her eyes off the sedan. He is here. Silence hit the line for half a second. Then Richard spoke again, lower now. Listen carefully. Leave the shelter and get somewhere public. Naomi almost laughed at the irony. Downtown Chicago at nearly 11 at night was public, but suddenly it did not feel safe at all. The bus stop lights buzzed softly overhead, while icy wind pushed rain beneath the glass walls around her. Daniel Mercer still had not stepped out of the car. He just watched. Then the unknown number called again. Naomi stared at the screen, glowing pale blue in her hand. Unknown caller. Her pulse hammered hard enough to make her fingertips numb. Do not answer it, Richard warned instantly. Too late. The call disconnected. A second later her phone vibrated again, but this time it was not a call. It was a text message. You should not have looked at those files. Naomi's breath caught. Another message appeared beneath it almost immediately. People get hurt over things they do not understand. The rain seemed louder now. Heavier. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward the sedan again. Daniel Mercer remained completely still. Behind the wheel, his expression hidden beneath shifting shadows and streaks of rainwater. But somehow she knew the messages came from him. Richard's voice sharpened through the phone. What did he send? Naomi read the words quietly. The silence afterward stretched painfully long. Somewhere down the block, reporters shouted questions near the tower entrance while camera flashes reflected off wet pavement like bursts of lightning. Naomi, Richard said carefully. Mercer has access to everything inside this company. Security feeds, employee records, home addresses. A chill crawled slowly down her spine. You think he would come after me? She asked. Richard did not answer immediately, and somehow that frightened her more than if he had said yes. The black sedan suddenly rolled forward another few feet, slow enough to feel deliberate. Naomi stood instantly from the bench, clutching the cardboard box tighter against her chest. Her notebook rested inside beneath the folded sweater and old thermos. The only proof connecting Mercer directly to the offshore accounts. Another message appeared. You have something that belongs to me. Naomi's heartbeat pounded inside her ears. Wind whipped rain sideways beneath the shelter hard enough to sting her face now. Across the avenue, people hurried beneath umbrellas without noticing the quiet standoff unfolding 3 blocks from a federal investigation that was already swallowing a billion-dollar company whole. Naomi, are you listening to me? Richard asked. Yes. You need to disappear for tonight. She frowned. Disappear where? He hesitated. Then finally, my penthouse. Naomi almost dropped the phone. What? Nobody would think to look there first, he said quickly. Federal agents are occupying most of the building. Mercer cannot move openly right now. Naomi stared toward the glowing Westbridge Tower rising through sheets of rain. Just hours earlier, Richard Whitmore had thrown her out of that same building like she was worthless. Now he was offering her protection inside the most private part of his world. The contradiction sat strangely in her chest. Then the sedan door opened. Naomi's breath stopped instantly. Daniel. Mercer stepped out into the rain wearing a dark overcoat, water sliding from his shoulders beneath the flashing reflections of downtown traffic. He did not rush, did not shout. He simply started walking toward the bus shelter with the calm confidence of a man who believed he was still in control. Daniel Mercer crossed the rain-soaked street with unsettling calm, his polished black shoes splashing through shallow puddles while headlights rolled across his face in shifting bands of white and gold. Naomi stood frozen beneath the shelter, the cardboard box pressed tightly against her chest. Richard Whitmore's voice continued through the phone in her ear, sharp now, urgent. Naomi, leave. Right now. But her legs refused to move. Mercer stopped just outside the shelter, water dripping steadily from the edge of his overcoat. Up close, he looked older than he had in the executive photographs hanging throughout Westbridge Dynamics. Gray touched the edges of his hair now. Deep lines framed his mouth, but his eyes stayed cold and focused beneath the glow of the flickering bus stop light. Miss Carter, he said smoothly, almost politely. Quite a night. Naomi said nothing. Behind her, buses hissed through flooded intersections while television helicopters circled faintly overhead. Mercer glanced briefly toward her phone. I assume Richard is listening. Richard's voice exploded instantly through the speaker. Stay away from her, Daniel. Mercer smiled faintly. Not warmly. Not kindly. Just the tired smile of a man finally watching his secrets unravel. 18 years, Mercer said quietly, ignoring the accusation. That is how long I spent helping build Westbridge. 18 years making sure Richard Whitmore became one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Rain rolled slowly down his face, but he never blinked. And tonight he finally realizes he trusted the wrong people. Naomi tightened her grip on the box. You used his clearance codes. Mercer looked at her with something almost resembling admiration. You are smarter than they gave you credit for. Richard spoke again through the phone, voice hard as steel now. Federal agents are already inside your office, Daniel. Mercer chuckled softly. And what exactly do you think they are going to find? The question hung heavily in the rain-dark air. Naomi watched his expression carefully. Too calm. Far too calm for a man supposedly cornered. Then suddenly she understood. You erased everything, she whispered. Mercer's smile widened slightly. Not everything. Naomi's pulse quickened. The notebook. He still believed she had the only remaining proof. Richard must have realized it at the same moment because his voice sharpened instantly. Naomi, do not give him anything. Mercer slowly stepped closer beneath the edge of the shelter roof, finally escaping the rain. Water dripped from his coat onto the concrete between them. Miss Carter, he said softly, you seem like a decent person. You took one accounting course and suddenly you think you understand the world these corporations operate in. Naomi lifted her chin. I took 4 years. Mercer paused. For the first time, surprise flickered faintly across his face. 4 years. Naomi nodded slowly. Forensic accounting. Northwestern University. Silence settled between them while traffic lights reflected red and green across the flooded street nearby. Mercer studied her differently now. Not like a maid. Not like an inconvenience. Like a variable he had miscalculated. And yet you ended up cleaning executive floors, he said quietly. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she answered calmly. Life happens. Something shifted in Mercer's expression then. Not guilt. Recognition. He glanced briefly toward the glowing tower behind him where federal agents still moved floor by floor through Westbridge Dynamics. Then he looked back at Naomi. Richard Whitmore spent years walking past you without seeing you, he said. That was his first mistake. Richard's breathing went silent through the phone. Mercer reached slowly into his coat pocket. Naomi stiffened instantly, but he only removed a folded piece of paper protected inside a plastic sleeve. He held it out carefully toward her. Do you know what this is? Naomi frowned, but did not move. Mercer's eyes darkened beneath the shelter light. It is the original transfer authorization. Richard's voice turned deadly quiet. Daniel, Mercer ignored him completely. Your precious CEO never signed these transactions, he said while rain thundered beyond the shelter. But somebody inside Westbridge wanted federal investigators to believe he did. Naomi stared at the document in Mercer's hand as realization crashed through her chest all at once. Richard Whitmore had not been the mastermind behind the fraud. He had been the target. Rain crashed against the glass walls of the shelter while Naomi stared at the transfer authorization, trembling faintly in Daniel Mercer's outstretched hand. The paper inside the plastic sleeve looked ordinary at first glance. Just another corporate document buried beneath signatures and transaction codes. But the name at the bottom made her stomach tighten instantly. Richard Whitmore. The signature looked perfect. Too perfect. It is forged, Richard said sharply through the phone. Mercer tilted his head slightly. Of course it is. Naomi looked between the document and the dark skyline behind him. Then why are you showing me this? Mercer's expression hardened for the first time all night. Because you are the only person who noticed the transfers before federal investigators arrived. Wind pushed cold rain beneath the shelter roof, while passing headlights painted streaks of silver across the wet sidewalk. Somewhere above the city, thunder rolled low between the buildings. Mercer stepped closer carefully, lowering his voice. Federal agents already believe Richard approved the offshore movement personally, he said. Once the press gets hold of this document, Westbridge collapses by sunrise. Richard's breathing sharpened through the speaker. Daniel, do not do this. Mercer ignored him again. 18 years, he repeated quietly. I gave that company everything. While Richard became the face on magazine covers, I handled the dirty work that kept investors smiling. Naomi watched him carefully now. Not just the words. The exhaustion beneath them. The bitterness that had been growing for years inside polished boardrooms and private offices. You stole the money, she said softly. Mercer smiled faintly. No, I redirected it. Naomi's jaw tightened. That is still stealing. The words landed harder than shouting. Mercer's smile disappeared completely. For a moment, only rain filled the silence between them. Then he slowly looked toward the glowing Westbridge Tower across the avenue. Do you know what happens in companies like that? He asked quietly. Men like Richard make billions while people like you clean their floors after midnight. Naomi did not answer. He never saw you, Mercer continued. Not until you became useful. Richard finally spoke again, lower this time. Not defensive. Honest. He is right about that. Naomi blinked. The confession seemed to hang in the cold air between the rain and traffic noise. Richard exhaled slowly into the phone. I did not see you, Naomi, he admitted. And I should have. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard more than the federal investigation had. Mercer noticed it too. His eyes narrowed faintly. Careful, Richard, he said coldly. Conscience does not suit you. Naomi looked down at the notebook inside her box. The pages held every transfer code she copied, every irregular routing structure, every hidden shell account. Enough to expose Mercer completely, but also enough to bury Richard beside him if federal agents saw the forged authorization first. Mercer followed her gaze instantly. That notebook disappears, he said quietly, and Richard survives this. Naomi looked up sharply. What? Federal investigators lose the transfer trail. Richard keeps his company. You walk away safely. Richard's voice exploded through the phone. Naomi, do not listen to him. Mercer stepped even closer beneath the flickering shelter light. Water dripped steadily from the edge of his coat, sleeves onto the concrete floor. Think carefully, he said. You owe that company nothing. Richard Whitmore threw you away the moment you spoke out. Naomi felt the truth of those words settle painfully in her chest. Just hours ago, she had stood humiliated beneath the cold lights of a boardroom while executives laughed at her existence. Richard had not defended her then. He had ended her career without hesitation. Mercer saw uncertainty flicker across her face and pressed harder. Burn the notebook, he whispered. Walk away from all of this. Nobody else gets hurt. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward the storm-dark city beyond the shelter. Sirens echoed in the distance while helicopters circled above downtown Chicago like restless shadows. Then she looked back at Mercer. Her voice came calm. Steady. You know the difference between you and me? Mercer frowned slightly. Naomi tightened her grip on the cardboard box. I was invisible too, she said softly. But I never used that as an excuse to become cruel. Daniel Mercer stared at Naomi Carter for several long seconds while rain hammered the city around them like static against glass. The traffic lights at the intersection shifted from red to green, washing the flooded street in changing colors that reflected across his tired face. Behind Naomi, Richard Whitmore stayed silent on the phone now, listening, waiting. Mercer's eyes slowly dropped toward the cardboard box in Naomi's arms. Toward the notebook holding every transfer code he thought nobody else had seen. Then, for the first time that night, his confidence cracked. Just slightly, barely visible. But Naomi saw it. You think integrity matters, Mercer said quietly. That is because the world has not broken you completely yet. Naomi held his gaze. Maybe it tried. Wind swept rain through the shelter again, fluttering the loose papers inside the cardboard box. Across the avenue, camera flashes exploded near the entrance of Westbridge Dynamics as reporters shouted questions toward federal agents moving in and out of the building. Mercer looked toward the tower one final time. The empire he helped build was collapsing floor by floor beneath white office lights and federal subpoenas. You know what happens after tonight? He asked without looking at her. Westbridge survives. Richard survives. Men like him always survive. Richard finally spoke through the phone, low and tired. Not like before. Mercer laughed softly under his breath. Not mocking, just exhausted. You still do not understand, Richard. Then he looked back at Naomi again. But she does. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Rainwater streamed off the shelter roof beside them in endless silver lines while distant sirens echoed through downtown Chicago. Then Mercer slowly lowered the forged authorization back into his coat pocket. Keep the notebook, he said quietly. Naomi frowned slightly. What? Mercer's expression looked strangely calm now. Empty almost. You already decided. Another gust of wind swept through the street as headlights rolled across the wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, car doors slammed. Federal agents were moving closer. Mercer heard them too. He gave Naomi one final look before stepping backward into the ring. For what it is worth, he said softly, you were the only honest person in that building. Then he turned and walked away through the storm-dark street without another word. Naomi watched him disappear between flashing police lights and blurred reflections until the rain swallowed his silhouette completely. The city suddenly felt quieter after he was gone. Richard exhaled slowly through the phone. Naomi, she closed her eyes briefly. The cold from the rain